Greetings, students, and welcome to this episode of The Professor Travel. I am your host, The Professor Travel, coming to you from Orange County, California. This is the website, the vlog, and the podcast that you come to in order to learn more about different travel destinations. Hopefully, this will inspire you to have a discussion and have conversations about these places. We hope this also inspires you to travel more and enjoy life more. Now, you can reach me on a variety of different social media sites, but starting first with my website, which is at theprofessortravel.com. You can also find me on both YouTube and Facebook at The Professor Travel. I'm now available on TikTok at The Professor Travel. If you're an Instagrammer, you can find me at the_professor_travel. If you're on Twitter, please find me there at TheProfessorTR1. And then, of course, if you're a blogger, you can find me at theprofessortravel.blogspot.com. Today, I am so privileged to have with us Sarah Rivas, our visiting professor from the Behind the Crew Door podcast. Hi, Sarah. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for coming on board. Now, for my viewers that are out there or for my listeners on the podcast, tell us a little bit about some of your credentials, a little bit maybe about your educational background and places that you've possibly traveled.
Sure. Yeah. I don't have any education when it comes to traveling. I'm just a very active traveler, and I have been since I was a kid. I was very privileged to have my parents be able to take me quite a few places when I was young, and I got the travel bug very soon after that. So I got to travel. I've been to Europe about 5 different times now, which is amazing, and I'm so privileged to be able to have said I've done that. And, I've been quite a few places around the world. So I just really enjoy traveling. That's for sure.
And for my viewers and for my listeners, part of this is going to be to discuss your podcast, which is called
Yes.
Behind the Crew Door, where you and your co-host, Tom, talk about things that, people working in the cruise industry experience on cruise ships, which is really fascinating. And that's what gives you guys, I think, a little bit of a distinctive difference than your average travel podcast or vlog that might be out there. So during this, we're going to discuss a little bit about what is behind the crew door. I also want to know a little bit about some of those countries you've been to and different continents you've been to. We'll talk about the different types of content that you have. And then, of course, some of your favorite travel tips to your viewers and listeners. Sound good?
Yeah,
Awesome.
sounds great.
Thank you so much. All right, so we want to know about you. Talk to us about Sarah Rivas. Who are you, and tell us a little bit about how you got involved in travel.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, like I said, went to Europe when I was a kid, so I just have such a soft spot for Europe. But the way that cruise ships kind of came into my life is I had, I went on only a couple cruises when I was a kid. It wasn't like I cruised a bunch or anything, but I happened to be traveling and backpacking through Europe with a friend of mine. We backpacked around Europe for about 7 weeks when I was 22 years old, I think, something like that. And I happened to meet a girl in Venice, Italy that had missed her ship, and she was a crew member on board. They were supposed to hold the ship for her. She was coming in from some other port or something. She was flying in, and they were supposed to hold the ship, but that message did not get to the captain. So she ended up having to spend the night in Venice, and her and I ended up striking up a conversation while we were sitting on a dock in Venice, eating cheese and crackers as one does in Venice, right?
Of course.
and she was telling me all about ship life and what it was like to be a crew member and all of that. And so after my 7 weeks of backpacking around Europe, you get home and you have that like sadness when you get home from a trip, and I said, I want to do something with my life. And I was a server in a restaurant at the time. And I said, I want to travel. So I started applying for any and all cruise lines. And the cruise line that I ended up working on, it just worked out. So I'm super grateful, and I'm grateful for meeting her, and who knows what my life would have been like after that. So
now let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you know what department she was part of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was a photographer. She was in the photography department.
And when you were looking to get involved in the travel industry, just because it was something that you were kind of, hey, this would be really kind of fun, were you looking to also remain as a server, or because what my listeners don't know is that you moved into the entertainment portion of the cruising world there?
So originally, yes, I did look to be a server. They don't really hire a lot of American servers on cruise lines, though. You don't really see them, and I'm not quite sure the reasoning why. But also, to be a server on a cruise ship, you have to have worked in like 5-star restaurants and like know all the different wines and steaks and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, and, you know, pull from the right and take from the left and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I did not have that kind of experience, which I realized very quickly while I was like kind of looking for those types of jobs. And I just couldn't find those types of jobs as an American. So then I kind of moved into, I was like, oh, well, I could, you know, take care of the kids. I know they have kids stuff on board. And then I realized I don't have that kind of experience either. So I was like, okay, well, that's not going to work out. So then I was talking with the recruiter back and forth. That's how this kind of happened. And she goes, well, with the experience that I see for you is you would be good as cruise staff, which for those of you who don't know, cruise staff on board, it's not the entire crew. It's the small team that's on most cruise lines, and they do host all the entertainment, you know, the bingos, the trivias, the deck parties, all the game shows, all that kind of stuff. That is your cruise staff team. So I said, oh, I've done a lot of theater in my life. That sounds great. Let's do that. I'm a personable person. So that's how that happened.
That's fantastic. Now, leading into our next slide, we're going to talk about the gentleman that's in these pictures with you.
Sure.
Again, how did you end up meeting Tom?
Yeah. So Tom is a technician. He worked on board. I was on board, I think, about a year before he came on. He worked for a previous cruise line and then quit there and then ended up coming to the cruise line that we worked for together. He was part of the general technicians, which means there are technicians that go around the ship and make sure all the lights and microphones and stuff are working around the whole ship. And then there are technicians that are designated just in the big theater on board. So he was doing all the other stuff except for the big theater. So he would come to all of my programs and he was, you know, getting my mics ready or my lights or, you know, setting all the like projectors or anything like that that had to be done. So we met that way. We didn't actually become friends until I came back for another contract because he was very quiet at first, which is very funny because if you listen to the podcast, he is very not quiet at all. So he was just like, you know, kind of feeling it out. And I went on vacation. I came back. And then a friend of mine, she was like, no, Tom's great. He's really funny. So then we ended up becoming very good friends after that.
That's so awesome. I love that story because you guys have such chemistry on your podcast, and it just it's hilarious. Now, one of the things you mentioned to me before we started this recording is that Tom is actually right now on a ship in I think in dry dock currently, and I was really appreciative of the fact that you even asked him if he would want to be on this podcast and vlog with us. But I know obviously internet's a little spotty and stuff goes on, you know, and he's obviously working right now somewhere in the world. But I wanted to find out a little bit about like, do you know what kind of stuff he's doing while they're in dry dock right now?
So I talked to him yesterday very briefly. So basically for those who don't know what a dry dock is, it's every few years, ships are mandated to be pulled out of the water and they have to like check all the, you know, the bowels of the ship and make sure all the seams are good and propellers and engines and all that kind of stuff. But that also, is a great opportunity when people aren't on board to, you know, rip out things and put in new looking things. And, you know, so he is working, and obviously since this is a COVID time, you know, he's in the theater still. So he transitioned to a big theater eventually, obviously. So he is now in the theater and they're doing a lot of maintenance because, you know, normally the ship, it's going 24/7, the projectors are on, the lights are on, you know, all the stuff is moving consistently. But since it's been COVID, those things haven't been happening. So he's been on board and he said he's been doing a lot of maintenance, just kind of getting everything kind of back up to where it was. And I know that they're doing a lot of stuff in the theater right now. I don't quite know what they're doing now because, you know, his internet's not quite the best right now. So we haven't had a chance to have like an actual conversation. Like, what are you doing? He's like, lots of work. And I said, okay, cool.
Got it. Thanks. Appreciate it. So let's talk. Okay. So you guys got to know each other a little bit more after the year that you guys were, you know, associated, and then you became friends. What inspired you guys to do a podcast together though?
Yeah, so when was that? 2018, he was in town for a friend of ours' wedding, and he was just sitting at my kitchen table, and we were chatting, and he goes, you know, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and he goes, and I've realized there are no podcasts with crew members, like of past crew members, because at that point, he wasn't working on a ship. He just recently went back. So he goes, I think it would be really fun to do that. And I was like, yes, we should definitely do that. And, we were saying, I said, there's so many things to talk about. So he went back, he was living in Dubai at the time. So he went back to Dubai, and we just started, talking about the different episodes that we could do. And then we started kind of recording them, and then we released them to the world, and we've realized that there are a lot of people out there that are super interested in that. So it's just kind of worked out really well for us, and we're just super happy. It's just a fun hobby for us, honestly.
But you know what? It comes across as like seriously genuine that you guys are having so much fun. One of
Oh
the things
yeah.
I remember, and now that I'm thinking back to some of the podcasts that I've listened to that you've had, you guys have like people in almost every single state that listen
Hmm.
to this, and probably a number of people all throughout the world. Tom is from Wales, and so
Yes.
I mean, I know that you have people that go outside of the continental U.S. clearly. So
Yeah. I haven't checked the stats recently, but I know we had, I think it was like 35 different countries were listening, people from
wow.
different, yes. And then as of now, I think we have 49 states. I think we're missing like North Dakota from listeners.
So if anybody out there is North Dakota, seriously
Yes.
subscribe. It's such a fun podcast. It's really, really
Yeah.
cool.
It's so amazing that we have that many people from around the world that are listening to us, and just the people that reach out to ask questions. I'm just baffled. It's so cool for us.
But it's always a really great idea to hear from not just like a travel vlogger like myself, someone who does a lot of traveling, but more tell us tell us about things that are behind the crew door. Tell us about stuff that happens under the waterline. Tell us about stuff that happens behind the curtain. Now, obviously, in many cases, and I would imagine in most cases, you really don't want to talk about the specific cruise line that you're part of
Hmm.
or a specific ship that you're part of, because obviously that would give it away too. Because sometimes unfortunately those stories are not the most flattering, but and other times they could just be funny, whimsical stories. There's a lot of different things that are out there that you can touch on that it's helpful for people to know about. So it's really appreciated that you guys have this, and I'm thoroughly floored every time I hear it, because you guys sound like you guys are having so much fun, and it really does show through.
We do. I mean, him and I are best friends. So it's really fun that we get a chance to do a fun hobby together, especially since we don't see each other that much. We only see each other maybe twice a year, if
Mhm.
that, most of the time. So it's nice.
But when you guys are working together on a ship, or had been in the past, you guys were pretty much in concert with each other every
Oh,
other day
absolutely.
or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's true, except Tom, I was on the same ship for my entire career on board. Tom bounced back and forth between multiple ships. So there was times where we would talk, but I didn't see him. And then there was times, I remember I hadn't seen him in about a year probably, but we were still like keeping in contact. And I remember I came back on board from vacation, and he happened to be on my ship. So we literally that evening booked it to the bar. I was so tired, even though I had just got back on board, but I booked it there. We sat and had a drink and caught up for like an hour and a half. It was just so nice. It was just such a nice, like reminiscent time for us.
I just thought about another question I was kind of curious about, since
Sure.
since you talked about it a little bit earlier. If you had someone out there, if we had one of the listeners who was like, I really would love to get involved in becoming a crew member on a cruise, but
Hmm.
I don't really know how to go about doing that. What would you tell them in order to have them start to get involved in that process? What would they need to know, like, ahead of time?
So if you're American, what I did is you have to go through a recruiter most of the time. Usually the cruise lines themselves aren't the ones that are hiring. There's just too many people that are applying. So they usually contract it out to third party recruiters. And then once they kind of whittle down what they want, then they send you on to the cruise line. So my suggestion is, if there's a certain cruise line that you're looking for, go on their website and then find the recruiting list, because those are the only people that can recruit for them. So if somebody's saying, if you pay me this amount of money, I will get you on board the ship, they're not a recruiter.
Mm-mm,
The recruiters get paid once you go on board. Like,
mm.
that's it. So I would go to those specific cruise lines that you want to look for, and then go from there. Obviously, I don't think a lot of cruise lines are hiring right now, but they will
Oh,
eventually.
yeah.
So that's what I would say, is go onto their specific website and find those recruiters. And
And
there are
for
some recruiters that, sorry, there are some
it's
recruiters
okay.
that hire for multiple cruise lines, which mine did.
Okay.
So I was supposed to interview for one cruise line, and then I actually ended up in interviewing for the one that I ended up working on. So
Is that typically because they're part of the same corporation?
Nope, they
Oh,
were different.
oh,
Yeah.
okay. So it's just
Yeah.
so you have like someone who's just a cruise recruiter, and they can go for multiple different types of
Right.
ones that are out
And
there. Okay.
certain cruise lines have certain requirements for the jobs, so that others don't. So that's the thing.
Okay, perfect. And then another thing in reference to the same topic, just so my listeners also know, and specifically because there are some that are not totally familiar with cruising, you aren't just hired once and then work indefinitely
Hmm.
throughout your entire tenure with the cruise corporation.
Right.
You typically are contracted for a specific time period. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. So it could be anywhere from, you could have a 1 month contract, which is not normal, but I would say anywhere from 1 month to 6 or 8 months. I believe maritime law is that you cannot work more than 8 months on board. You have to have a vacation after you hit 8 months.
Okay.
So I never worked that long. The longest I ever worked, I believe, was 5 months at a time. And then after that, you get a vacation for a certain amount of time.
Nice. Okay, cool.
Hmm.
Well, let's move on to some of the countries that you've traveled to. I'd love to hear
Sure.
about that. So
Yeah.
first off, how many continents do you think you've been to?
Okay, I was counting because you had asked me that question. And so I believe it's four. I've been to North America, South America, Europe, and Dubai is part of Africa, correct? Is that
I think it's technically part of Africa. Yeah.
the African continent,
Yeah.
right? So I've been to Dubai, so four.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. And about how many countries do you think you've been to? And just ballpark it,
I think it's like 35, I
Okay.
think. Yeah.
You're more than me. I'm at 23 right now, and I'm working my way up. But I've only gone like over the last couple of years. I've been hitting like especially with cruises. It's like boom,
Right.
boom, 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 boom. You hit like five at once, and it's kind of like a sampler platter at that point. So
Yes.
really kind of cool. Okay, cool. Another question that I know was going to be really interesting. So when you're on a cruise, specifically when I, as a guest, I'm on a cruise, I have a lovely cabin, whether that's an inside all the way up to a suite. But when
Hmm.
you're a crew, you have a little bit of a different arrangement. Tell us about what the cabins are like for you
All
guys.
right. Yes. Okay. That is a hot topic when you work on board. People ask you that all the time. Yeah, I would say so, depending on your rank. So, if you go on a cruise ship, you can see, depending on the cruise line you go on, there's officers. They have stripes on their shoulders and/or on their wrists, or just depending on the cruise line you go to. So, depending on your rank on board, it also depends on what kind of cabin you have. So, if you have no stripes, that means that you cannot go in any guest areas when you're off. That also means that you share a cabin with either 2 or 3 people, just depending on how it works, or one other person. I had a half a stripe, so I shared with one other person. So it was me and a roommate. To say that a cabin is small is severely understating what it is.
It's a closet
It
size.
it really is like a walk-in closet, like a master room's walk-in closet.
Man.
Yeah, no, it's not bad. Like, you get used to it. You don't sleep there. I mean, you do sleep there, but you don't like spend a lot of your time there. So basically, in my cabin, if I stood in the middle of the room, I could touch the bunk bed and I could touch the bathroom door
Oh
just
wow.
by standing in it. And then we had a little desk area with a TV, and then we had 2 bunk beds, and we each had like a tiny little wardrobe, and that was it. So they're very, very small.
That also speaks to another subject on that same topic, which is like, okay, you're going to be on this ship for months at a time, potentially in some cases.
Hmm.
If that's the case, you can't, like when you're visiting places, you can't just get souvenirs and stuff like that unless you're sending them back home, I would imagine. Is that a good
Yeah, I
assessment?
mean, well, so um, yes, there's a little bit of storage, but not a lot. So if you're buying like small stuff, not a big deal. When we were in Alaska, I had heard, this was not me, but I did hear of crew members that purchased chainsaws because they were in Alaska, which was very interesting.
Hmm.
So they would hold that. Obviously, you can't have a chainsaw as a crew member, so they
Why
they would
would you
hold.
want to have a chainsaw as a crew member? I think is
I
more the
couldn't
appropriate question.
I just remember it being like a topic of discussion with security, being like, you can't buy chainsaws, guys. Like, let's not do that. And so I remember security had to hold them until the end of their contract, and then they would ship them home or
It's
whatever
like
it was.
for
So
for the log rolling competitions on board in the pool. I
I
don't know what that would really be
I have
for.
no idea why people did that. But it might have been like a hot new item that people wanted. I'm not quite sure. So there was times where I would leave stuff on board for when I would go on vacation.
Mhm.
And then, then I'd come back and someone would hold a bag for me because they would still be on board when I came back.
Okay.
And so there got to a point where I couldn't pack all my stuff up. So I definitely had to ship things home when I knew I was going to be resigning. So I shipped a couple big boxes of stuff home,
Okay.
so.
The same topic. Let's say, for example, you know that you're supposed to arrive in a port, let's say Sitka or wherever else.
Sure.
Um, can you have like Amazon deliver something to Sitka and then you pick it up there? Or like, have you ever done anything like that?
So the ship itself actually has an address. So it's usually in the home port, wherever your home port is. If you're talking about Alaska, our home
Yeah.
port was Vancouver.
Right.
So you could have stuff shipped to Vancouver and then it would come on board. They would sort all the mail and then one of your leaders would give it to you.
Okay.
Generally speaking, if it was just a port that we were stopping at, you could theoretically, have it shipped to a post office and then go pick it up. But that's kind of risky, especially if like you can't get off the ship that day or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. So usually anytime I would get back on board, if we were in a different home port, they would give us the new address. And then if your family wanted to ship something or if you wanted to order Amazon. But I feel like when I was on board, Amazon, Prime was not like a big thing just yet. It wasn't as big as it is now where people would just have like anything and everything shipped to you. So, it did happen, but not to the extent I think that it does now, which I can't even imagine what the mail like coming to ships are now.
It's got to be mind blowing considering everything, especially, well, I imagine post COVID, it's going to be even more so. So
Yeah.
it'll be just like, that's a whole nother topic. We'll have to get into it another time. But on the topic of safety and security, let's also talk about really quick, countries that you may have gone to that may either have political or civil unrest,
Mm-hmm.
or what the ship is supposed to do in specific situations like that. Have you ever experienced anything like that at all?
Just once. It wasn't anything crazy. We were coming back from the West Coast and we were going to be going through the Panama Canal and coming back to the East Coast. We were coming back from Alaska from the summer and we were supposed to stop in Mexico and they had just, I think it was Puerto Vallarta, and they had just had like a bunch of shootings that had just happened in that port area. And I remember one of my team members was from Mexico, and I remember him telling our cruise director, saying something along the lines of like, like I'm from Puerto Vallarta. It's not a bad city. It's just a little, I understand that this is scary, but like, it's a really great place to go. We should still go there. And I think they had already made the decision that we were going to skip that port.
Okay.
So those types of things, if we don't feel comfortable enough having our guests get off the ship, because nobody wants bad press from that type of thing, so they
Yeah.
made the decision to skip that port that time. We have gone to Puerto Vallarta multiple times, but at that point in time it was just kind of like, this isn't the best time to be going there right now, so they just
I,
kind of do that type of thing.
I was going to ask, is that a decision that's made from the ship, like by the captain and security, or is it something that's made by the corporation
I
that's
think
owning the ship?
I think it's probably a little of both. I was not high ranked enough to know those. I wasn't there for those types of conversations, but I
Sure.
think it's a little of both, where they talk to their shoreside partners and kind of debate what's going to happen. And I know they do this a couple weeks out usually. So they probably already knew that they were going to skip that port
Yeah.
pretty early on. And we're just like, nope, it's just not a good idea,
I had a situation a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2016 where I went to Barcelona for the first time, and when I got right when we were arriving, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but the Catalonian government, they're trying to secede from Spain, and
Oh.
so when we arrived, the local Catalonian politicians had been arrested by the by the Spanish government, and so there were protests in the street. It wasn't anything violent or anything like that, but there were like
Mm.
they were blocking traffic, and then at nighttime, you had people near the hotels were banging pots and pans outside their windows and stuff like that. So
Oh
like,
my
we can
goodness.
clearly hear there's something going on. It wasn't violent, as I said, and people in Barcelona are some of the best in the world. They are so
Yes.
nice, absolutely the nicest people in the world. But man, it was like, oh wow, should we go? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So I imagine there's certain risk assessment that's taken into consideration whenever a cruise ship is visiting port. But let's also talk about some other places as well. Countries that you would like to travel to, but that you've not yet. Is there a specific one or top three maybe that rise to the top?
Oh yeah. No, I want to go to Australia so bad.
Oh
Like
wow.
I want it, but I don't want to do just a week there. I want to do like 3 weeks where you travel like the whole country,
Mm.
and you hit all the major hot spots. And then like while you're there, New Zealand too, because it's there,
Oh, of
go down
course.
there.
Yeah.
because New Zealand apparently is beautiful. So I'd like to do like Australia and New Zealand in like and just like a nice little like roundabout like 3-week trip if I could.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd love to go to Thailand.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, I really want to go there, and I'd really love to go to Japan at some point as well.
Nice. I'm really
Those are my three.
surprised when you went to Dubai that you didn't have a stopover in like Australia, or like were you going from
No, we
where-
had a direct flight. I went
okay.
in 2010, 2010, 2011, something like that, around there. And we had a direct flight from San Francisco to Dubai. So it
Okay.
was like a 16 and a half hour flight. That's the longest flight I've ever been on.
Oh my gosh, that is
Yeah, very long.
hopefully it wasn't coached the whole way, but I mean,
Oh,
if
it
it was,
was. It's okay.
uh, well, you're a little bit more compact than I am, so
It's true.
um, I am very curious, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about culture in terms
Sure.
of what's on the ship and maybe some of the things that the crew have to work with. So say, for example, you have individuals on the crew who have specific religious needs. Say, for example, you have someone who's Muslim who needs to pray at certain times of the day, or maybe you have certain religious holidays that need to be observed. How does a ship handle that in terms of a crew perspective, and then in terms from a guest perspective?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so as an American, on most cruise ships, we are in the minority most of the time, I would say. On the ship that I was on, there was generally, I'd say, around 100 or less than 100 of us on a 1,500 crew member ship. So I would say with religion, when it came to that kind of thing, people in their certain, cultures, I think they kind of stuck together when it came to that kind of thing. I know that there was like parties or like, or if they wanted to pray together, there was like different times and places to do that. I never obviously participated in
Sure.
those types of things. I think when it came to being Muslim, I don't think they allow time to pray 5 times a day.
Okay.
I could be wrong. I'm not quite sure though when it came to that type of thing, but I do know that when there were bigger holidays on board, there was some sort of place where you could go and celebrate it. There was like a room or something, and they did have those types of events for the crew members. I just didn't go to them. When we had like, Christmas on board, there's a lot of crew members from different countries that are Catholic. So you were allowed, even if you're not allowed in guest areas normally, you were allowed to go to the services with the guests in your
Nice.
uniform. So you can go to Ash Wednesday or whatever it may be, or Christmas Day celebrations or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you can go and do all those types of things. So they did not like discriminate against that, which was very nice.
Oh, that's lovely. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
On another topic of culture, there's art. And I know
Yeah.
that with respect to that, many ships have art galleries and they bring on art. Usually, is that like a third party that does that? Are they employed by the actual cruise company themselves? Do you know about that?
I believe that they are separate companies, but they're like same thing with most of the photographers on board. Those are also separate companies that are just contracted out. I don't know. I'm not quite sure why, but I believe art companies, they are separate. And also
Okay.
casino workers are different as well. They're
Hmm.
not employed by the cruise line as well. So I'm not quite sure on that. I'm sorry.
And no, that's okay. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, but spa workers are also
Yes.
separate now too. I think they used to be
Mm-hmm.
employed by the cruise company, and then they've completely done away with that, and now they're like third party, different party.
Yes. Well, at least on my ships, they were separate. But yes, I believe so on most cruise lines are like that.
Okay. Now, obviously, when we talk about culture, we also talk about language too, and there's a
Sure.
plethora of languages that
Oh
are
my
spoken
gosh.
on board. How, are announcements and crew instructions usually done in English?
Yes. So on my cruise line, and probably others as well, if you're based out of the United States, your home ports are usually that. The crew members, if you are not from an English-speaking country, you have to take an English-speaking test. So I think it's a written and a verbal test as well, I believe, so that you have a good understanding of the English language because all announcements are made in English. I believe if you are on a ship that's out of like China or over, in Asia somewhere, that you need to be able to speak English and whatever language a majority of the passengers would be coming on board so that
Okay.
it's not super confusing. So I believe that English is a prominent language on most cruise lines though.
Okay, perfect. Now, also when I think about culture, I'm a foodie. I love
Sure.
food, and it goes back to I didn't include the picture, but there's a fantastic picture of your co-host Tom with a crab leg that's like
Oh
a massive thing in his face.
yeah.
Um,
Yes.
but in terms of diet and food aboard the ship and how that's brought on the ship, talk to me a little bit about like, do ships use locally sourced vendors when they arrive at specific ports? Do they typically have something contracted out? Do you know a little bit about that at all?
So I'm not a lot, but I do know some stuff. So
Okay.
I know that it's whatever the shoreside partners set up to have the deliveries. So, I mean, depending on the size of the ship, there could be like 10,000 eggs that are eaten every
Oh
cruise.
my
You know what I mean?
gosh.
It's nuts. Like, let me tell you, it's crazy. So they do have, usually we get our food, I believe, in our home port because that's where we have the longest turnaround time. For those that don't know, usually cruises start like you get off the ship at 9 a.m. on that Sunday, and then that same Sunday we're leaving by 5 p.m. with the next group of people on board. So it's a very long turnaround time where we're in port for like 8 or 9 hours, and we get as much stuff on board as we can. So I know with the food, that's usually when it comes on board. However, I do recall a time, I believe we were based out of Galveston, Texas. I think that's where we were. And for some reason, the food did not arrive. The food, the paper cups, all the stuff that we normally set sail with did not arrive. I don't remember why. So they had it all shipped to Jamaica. And we were promised that it was going to be there in Jamaica. Well, we got to Jamaica and the food wasn't there.
Oh
And then we
no.
waited around in Jamaica. We were supposed to set sail at like 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And we ended up waiting another couple hours and we're like, we got to go. We got to get to our next port. I can't remember where we were going next, but we got to go. Maybe it was like Key West and it took a while to get there. So we had to leave. And
Oh
then
man.
just as we were getting ready to set sail, the food arrived. And I have never seen so many crew members out on the dock pushing things onto the ship as fast as humanly possible because we had to leave. I made the mistake after all of that came on board and they shut the shell doors and everything, and we took off to go have dinner, which was where all the food was being stored. It was right next to where our crew mess was. I have never seen people shoving things towards the freezers as fast as they can ever in my life. I was trying to step over things. I was trying
Oh
to get in there
man.
and I was like, I'm so sorry. I am in the way. I am so, so, so sorry. So generally speaking, it doesn't come on board from the ports that we go to. It's usually all outsourced and it does come from wherever we are locally,
Mhm.
but not usually from a country that we're going to, if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. And I know like think it was a couple of the river cruises that are in Europe. I think
Mm-hmm.
they will go like and have like they'll pick up the chef will have his crew or members of his team pick up locally sourced stuff when they're actually at a local port, and then they usually try to create a confection associated with that thing. But that's more themed, I think, and that's not
Sure.
necessarily the bulk of it all.
Mm-hmm.
But man, one other question in reference to that story that you just made mention of. Um, the term "all hands on deck," I think,
Yes.
comes from like it literally. It sounds like whether you were working in guest services or entertainment or Etsy or whatever, or they were like, "Go, go, go!" So I mean, was it that kind of a situation where they were like literally everybody just grab something and get it on board, or
I don't think it was quite that. I think it was a lot of our deckhands that
okay,
were bringing the stuff on board. And then I think it was the chefs that were throwing things into the freezers so that they know where things are going,
okay,
that kind of thing. But I mean, I don't think any entertainment was out there doing helping. Honestly,
one can
but
never say. It's
we
like,
do have a lot of deckhands on board, so I think it was kind of an all hands on deck for the deckhands, you know.
got it.
So
Um, speaking of the crew, there's going to be time when there's going to be downtime for the crew, whether
hmm
that's when you're doing a transatlantic or whether you're doing, at sea days or things like that. I mean, obviously you have your days that you have your times that you're working, unless you're working back to back hours for specific roles. But then there's also a lot of time that you have off. What type of recreation or sports do the members of the crew have access to, or facilities that they have access to?
Sure. So on my ship, we had a crew pool. I would tell you that Nobody really used it though. Um, there's not very many crew pools on like newer ships that are being built because people just don't have the time to use it.
Yeah.
I think I've been in that crew pool 3 times in my 3 years of being there. So if that'll tell you something. And a couple of times I was pushed in. But anyways, that's a whole different story. But
We'll have to listen to
yeah,
your podcast in order to find out that story sometime.
yeah, true story. But we have a gym. There's a crew gym for everybody. You wouldn't see people in there during the day as much as you would see people probably between like midnight and 2 a.m. because a lot of people get off work around midnight. And so people go to the gym at night, or you'd see them super early in the morning between 4 and 5 o'clock. I had a couple team members that would go at like 4 in the morning, and they called me once. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go with you. I didn't go with them, but yeah, no.
You're like, yeah, of course, I'll be there.
Yeah, that did not happen. And then, for sports and stuff, that we have a pool table on board. We had a foosball table. They have like some stuff. There's like a library for crew, but I know that we had some times where we would do like competitions between the different departments. And when we were in port, they would have like soccer games or, football or, races and that kind of stuff, just to kind of keep the morale, and having inter-department, competitions and like that kind of thing, just to kind of keep morale up for sure. So there are things, it's just, and then they would have like crew parties. Those were kind of the biggest thing though, where they would have crew parties that started at midnight, went till 2 a.m. and, like Halloween or St. Patty's Day or that kind of thing. So that was kind of the most recreation I would say that people did.
Absolutely. And then, so let's get back to your podcast because
Sure.
I love it. It's fantastic. I've been
you.
a subscriber to it myself for a couple of years now, and I think it's fantastic. Uh, Talk to me a little bit about the content. So I know we have some news in there, and I shouldn't say a couple of years. I apologize. About a year now.
Yeah.
And so we know we now have a little bit of news that breaks on there, and you guys talk about that. There's aspects of ship life, and there's behind the scenes stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What other content are you looking at and incorporating into your podcast?
Well, eventually we would once Tom's probably on vacation next, we're probably going to hopefully bring some more people on that have worked on ships, like our friends and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we can start interviewing more people because I feel like Tom and I have told a lot of our stories, and I want to hear other people's stories and what their version of ship life is. Because that's always fun, just to hear how people adapted to ship life and their time on board and transferring ships and that kind of thing. It's just very fun to hear it. And we have had a couple people on, a couple of our friends that live here in Orlando, but I'd like to get some more people on as well that have different stories to tell.
Well, I can tell you, we're definitely going to be looking forward to it. But now, burning questions. What is the most common question that your viewers ask you?
Oh man, that's a great question. I would probably say people were super interested about the food. Like before we did our food episode, people were like, "Can you tell us more about the food?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's not good. What else do you want to know?" Like,
I think I think you were the first podcast I was listening to when you actually talked about the crew mess, and
Sure.
I never really got because I always assumed that maybe you guys ate after hours in like the buffet area or something like that. I don't know why I thought that, but it was like, I just never really thought that there was a designated area that you guys were kind of separate from, and because I thought you guys could take part in all the amenities anyways. So
Oh no, that's not a thing.
now, what is a question that you wish that you would be asked by your listeners and or viewers?
I don't have any wishes that people would ask. I'm just like floored that people are super interested in it. It's just really cool to have people reach out and tell us, that they're loving our podcast, and then they ask whatever question they may have. It's just nice that people are so interested, and they're like, "You haven't covered this yet." I'm like, "You're right, we haven't. Let's do that." It's just nice that people are so interested.
With all the traveling that you do, are you more of a mobile passport person? Do you have global entry? Anything like that?
I do have mobile passport. I don't have global entry. I did get actually, I just recently got TSA PreCheck, which is funny because I travel so much. But I do have mobile passport, and I have used that a couple times, and man, that saves you a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I wasn't sure like with Orlando if you actually clocked it, but I can tell you, like, I live in Southern California, so going through LAX used to take me, in some cases it would take me an hour to an hour and 15, maybe an hour and 30 minutes in some cases, especially when you're traveling back internationally. After I got global entry, it now takes me 15 minutes at the most. It's just,
Yes.
yeah, it's crazy fast how this goes. So yeah, if for my students and listeners that are out there, if you haven't considered this, I mean, seriously, now's the time to really
Mobile
invest in
pass.
that.
Yeah, I mean, mobile passport. My dad was the one who actually told me about that. I was coming back from Canada and just walking through, the immigration area, and where I had the little sign that said mobile passport, and there was two people in front of us. And then there's
Oh
like the
man.
massive line of US residents, massive line of international travelers. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go down here where these two people are and good to go.
That's awesome. Now, when you are traveling and you're going to a country that does not use the US dollar, do you
Mhm.
usually purchase the currency before you go, or do you purchase it after you've arrived at their location?
So what I've always done, and I think I got this from my mom, we always just go over with a little of our American cash, but then I go to the ATM and I just pull out a good chunk of cash, usually about $200 worth, I'd say,
Mhm.
from the NATM, so that I'm charged just the one time, from my bank, because, the banks like to charge the fees. And then I just use that. I don't ever get it beforehand. I just
Okay.
always kind of wait and wing it, because I know there's going to be an ATM somewhere.
And with most places, you can use cards anyway, so it's not like
Right.
or at least now I think everything is like chipped, so it's not terribly
Yes.
bad. So, well, Sarah, we're coming to the end of this session, but I really want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It's been a delight, and as I said, your podcast is so fun, and I highly recommend everybody to jump onto it. It's called Behind the Crew Door, but you can also find you guys on Facebook. Is there any other method that people should track you down?
We're also on Instagram at Behind the Crew Door, and on Twitter, but we don't use Twitter that much. But we're at, I believe it's at crew_door.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Now, for my students that are out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can certainly direct them to me at scott@theprofessortravel.com. If you like this video and you're on YouTube and you want to see when new videos come up, hit the bell icon at the top of the screen in order to be alerted when new videos come up. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you like what you're seeing and you want to see more, please give us a like. If you, however, are on the podcast and you want to rate us, please, by all means, give us a rating. We really appreciate it. Until our next time, however, make every trip a travel adventure. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.